Hey everyone, this is James bringing you another video review of How to Kill a Judge 1975, talking more about some Italian genre films today. And this one's a fun one, and not one I necessarily expected to bring on. I more ran into this film when I was looking at the Arrow player and looking at the different things, and I had not even realized this was recently kind of restored into a very nice looking print of Blu-ray by Radiance Films, so good job by them. I think they did 3 of the Damiano Damiani films, all starring Franco Nero, into like kind of one box set called the Cosa Nostra, which I'm very tempted to buy. I have not kind of bought it yet, but it's very interesting because I think he's a director that's definitely ripe to kind of pick through and look through some of his films. I think he's definitely one of the best kind of Eurocrime, Poliziotteschi genre filmmakers, and definitely one of the more unique ones too. He worked quite a lot in Italian crime films and has a very varied outlook, and his films really feel a little fairly distinct compared to kind of more of the other kind of Eurocrime auteurs or the different directors that were working, so people like your DeLeos, your Umberto Lenzi's, your Castellaris. Damiani is probably a lot more interested in kind of the political and social commentary, and I think it feels a little more deeply felt. His films feel a little more serious. I think if you're trying to kind of introduce his films to people that maybe aren't as much of genre freaks as some of the people that might listen to or watch this video channel, he might be the one to do it. In fact, I think I might want to show Iñaki some of his films just because they're very interesting, they're thought-provoking. One of the Italian critics, I think it's Pello Margaretti or someone like that, described him as kind of like the most American of directors, which when I hear that sounds like an insult, and I don't know if it was intended like that. It very well could have been, but if we're to look at like kind of the context of when he was working in the 60s and the 70s, if I'm being compared to kind of the American directors of that era, which is really a great era of American films, I don't think that's insulting at all. I think there was a lot of great films being made both in America here as well as over in Italy too. So that's interesting in a way. Yeah, and unlike his his directorial peers, he was in his 50s directing this, so he's a little bit older than them, and I do think that comes across with sort of his more mature style. So before we get too far, let's get into the synopsis of this film, and should you watch this, and why you should watch this film. Filmmaker Giacomo Solaris is entangled in a plot when his film about a corrupt judge is starting to be imitated by the real-life murder of a judge. Should and why to watch this? Well, I think you definitely should watch this. In my opinion, this is a very well done, slow burn, thought-provoking thriller that kind of captures the local southern, in this case Palermo, corruption and politics very well, and asks interesting questions kind of about the relationship of media and popular media being created, so films in this case, with kind of the real life violence that is occurring. And of course, these are real things that are happening, and all you have to do is look at the great and very provocative title, How to Kill a Judge, which reminds me a lot of the title of the film that came out, I think, a year or two ago, How to Blow Up a Pipeline, which kind of has this, it's a very thought-provocative title that kind of is like, that's an interesting title, and of course, it's sort of exists in this sort of like meta universe where within the film itself there's a film which is used to inspire a killing, or is it? And so it really explores those different relationships, and it's really relevant to something like the Poliziotteschi genre or Eurocrime films being made, where a lot of those films, the basic plots are taken from things just kind of straight ripped from the headlines. So it's like art imitating life, or is it life imitating art? Which is inspiring which. So in that sense, the film is very much self-aware. It's also inspired by a real life. Damiani talks a little bit about kind of a judge that I think was assassinated down in South. I think it was in Sicily too, and that it was like kind of a very significant thing that happened earlier in the 70s. And so this film is very much kind of a reaction to things that are going on. Italian genre film, Poliziotteschi film, almost at its peak right now in 1975. This is like, I believe this might even be the year where Italy was making the most amount of films. From here, it really went downhill quite quickly afterwards. So yeah, really interesting in that sense. So shout out to Radiance. The other 2 films in the box set are both really good too. There's is it called Day of the Owl? I forget. I get it mixed up with the Claude Trabal film. That one's really good, and The Case is Closed, forget it. Both of those also star Franco Nero. They're both also based in Sicily. The fourth one, which I'm assuming they just couldn't get, is probably the best of them, Confessions of a Police Captain, which is not in the box set, unfortunately. But those are all really, really good films, so really happy to see Damiano Damiani getting some love there. They also released another really great 70s sort of paranoid political thriller from him, Goodbye and Amen, recently, which I just kind of pulled the trigger on. So up to really, really interesting things at these time, and I think he's probably one of the most consistently interesting of those kind of Poliziotteschi genres, and really, really varied output. The look of this film, when you think of the Eurocrime film, I'm inclined to think of the films of people like Lenzi and, of course, De Leo, a lot of them set in kind of Milan or these sort of more northern or central cities. And the whole Cosa Nostra box set, I believe, entirely takes place in the south, in Sicily. So this film is mostly in Palermo, so that's interesting as well. So very much kind of doing his own thing. And so I think he kind of exists in the space that isn't quite 100% pure, like, genre romp thrills, like someone like Lenzi, but isn't, like, a super serious filmmaker. He's still working largely in genre. And so for me, that's a really, really great intersection, but I think for people that are coming from one camp or the other, it might be a little bit of a tug-of-war to sort of settle those two. He directed, in my opinion, a really great spaghetti western, A Bolt for the General. That's one of those set during the Mexican Revolutionary War, so kind of inherently political there too. Funnily enough, did he do more than one American film? I'm not totally sure, but one of his most well-known films is Amityville 2, a film that I actually quite enjoy, but is kind of one of those where it's like, Damiano Damiani directed this? It just feels very, very bizarre. But he's very good at combining the genres with some sort of a social message. And so, he worked in quite a lot of genres. Probably he was most prolific in the Italian crime films, maybe because those had kind of a greater window being made. He made one kind of borderline jolly, rather complicated girl. But he was one of those guys that existed for a while, ended up working in television for a bit. And unlike someone like, I don't know, let's say Argento or Bava, he's visually very competent, but not as showy. And the music as well is kind of like, it integrates very well into the films too, in a way that I could see being classified as a little more American than kind of the way that it stands out. In fact, this film is scored by Riz Ortolani, who of course did some very, very notable scores, probably most notably Cannibal Holocaust, but one of those great Italian composers. Seems like they had a half dozen of them, or even a dozen, just working during that time, cranking out just really, really wonderful film music. It's good here. It's just not quite used in a way that's as showy as something like, I don't know, the Argento Jolly or something like that. And that I think is Damiani's, it's certainly a characteristic of him, is he's not as showy of a craftsman as some of the other people. And in that sense, I don't remember his films quite as well as some of the other directors, and for me at least, the rewatchability is not quite as high, because I know the films are going to be a little longer, a little bit more of a slow burn, and I'm going to have to think a little bit more. Those aren't bad things necessarily, but it does mean like I approach his films in a fairly different way than I would approach a Lenzi film or something like Italian Connection from De Leo. So first of all, the film looks really great. The cinematographer was Mario Volpiani. It just really shows the kind of Sicilian countryside very well. One recent comment that, I've heard this sort of comment before, but it was a nice reminder on the channel, and shoot, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting who exactly left it, was from someone that is Italian, and is commented basically that there's a lot of regional things that are going on in these different films. I think specifically in the Poliziotteschi, where you have a lot of commentary on kind of the social dynamics of the time, people from the south migrating to the north, where there's more opportunity and that kind of thing, and this one is set in the south. So I suspect there's a lot of different local flavor. Some of that comes across here, but I suspect there's probably quite a bit missing for someone that's not Italian speaker. I did watch this in Italian with English subtitles. I think the first time I watched this film 4 or 5 years ago, it was probably the dub. I'm not 100% confident on that. But it really gives you kind of this good feeling of kind of like the political and local dynamics there. You have kind of the local paper and stuff that's more leftist, where Franco Nero's kind of filmmaker, artist, kind of leans towards the beginning, and those are kind of his friends. But eventually it kind of just slowly unveils kind of all these different layers of corruption and stuff like that. And it's not kind of cartoonish or silly like perhaps the Franco Nero film that he's made, so the film within the film, but it's done in a way that feels very realistic. And you also get a really good feel of how people are using kind of certain plot events and like the killing of the judge for their different agendas, how there's a lot of fingers being pointed, and you see a lot of the political maneuverings that happens. And it's not one where it's necessarily, it's clear that probably Damiani has a fair amount of contempt for the politicians there, but nevertheless, I think the left-leaning kind of paper is portrayed in a fairly critical light too, where we see these people that are kind of like gleeful about the death of the judge, in a way that even Franco Nero's character, who's mostly sympathetic to their cause, is a little bit to as well. And so I think it does a very good job kind of just establishing those different things and how we all want to kind of take advantage of things, certain events or people that are killed, to kind of point, to make a certain point about the political cause that we believe in and that we want to promote. So I think in that sense the film is very, very interesting and quite successful. Franco Nero, it's really helpful, I think, for a Damiani vehicle to have a very strong central performance. Franco Nero, in my opinion, is probably my favorite Italian actor working at this certain time. Of course, you have your outside people coming in, like people like Henry Silva and whatnot, who are great in the Poliziotteschi genre. But I think if you're trying to get someone good, Franco Nero is equally capable of being more of an action hero, someone like Enzo Castellari's films, as well as being in kind of these thinking man productions by Damiano Damiani, and he appeared in 4 of the films. I think I've already named all 4 at the top. And in that sense, the political moment there actually feels, in ways relevant to the times we're at here in the U.S. too, where there's incredible strong partisan lines and there's a lot of finger pointing and whatnot. So again, Damiano Damiani, not necessarily super showy as a storyteller, but I think he makes what is one of the more dense, complex plotting fairly interesting and pretty clear, even for someone that is an outsider. So I really appreciate how he kind of mixes this kind of commercial narrative thriller with these real-life themes that, this is a film that's definitely trying to say a little bit more than I don't know, Syndicate Sadist or something like that. And of course he did get a writing credit here too. So let's see. Up until the end, apparently Damiani was still a little ambivalent about the film and thought he could have wrapped stuff up in a slightly different way. This is from the Roberto Curti Italian crime filmography book too, which is interesting. For me at least, I do find the film to be pretty satisfying in how it ends. Let's see. So, downside, the film is a little bit longer, and so it's not exactly like a super propulsive, keep things moving really fast thriller. Nevertheless, I think it moves fast enough for me. It's definitely a little bit of a slow burn, but I think once you kind of get past the really good first 30 minutes or so, it does start to slow down just a bit. He is not a set-piece based filmmaker, so he's not going to have like some crazy car chase or something like that. Nevertheless, there's a couple nicely executed sort of minor set pieces. You have the assassination of one of Nero's friends, which is well thought out and shot in a manner that feels fairly realistic. That's of Renzo Palmer. And you also have a gangster who is also killed at a point in a very nice piece of very slow-moving camera work where he's basically poisoned with some sort of blood thing or whatever. So, there's just enough genre thrills to, I think, keep the Poliziotteschi person happy. This is not an art film in that sense. It's not, like, glacially paced or anything like that. A little bit slower than perhaps your average Poliziotteschi, but nothing that I think people would have an issue with. You do still get some, like, the great Italian faces if you watch a lot of these films. That you probably recognize. You have Renzo Palmer, who I already mentioned, who's I always enjoy seeing his face pop up, always very distinct. Luciano Catanacci, who is usually playing more of a gangster role. Here he plays the most gangsterish lawyer. You have Elio Zamuto playing one of the other judges and politicians here. And yeah, I think it's very, very successful in the way that it just shows how everyone is trying to mold this very public event, the three different groups, to basically their own personal gains and exploit things, and shows the kind of behind-the-scene boomerang. And really the only one that seems to care about getting to the truth, as opposed to kind of really slanting and twisting things, is the Franco Nero character, who feels responsible because he's like, well, did my film help to contribute to this and cause the actual assassination of this guy? Okay, so who won the film? Definitely Damiano Damiani, in my case. As good as Franco Nero is, this feels very much kind of like a project that he had his hands on a lot. Double feature, I'm going to pair this with something different. So rather than going with another film set in Sicily of the Cosa Nostra, going with the thriller that came a couple of years later, which I think is really, really underseen, I Am Afraid. This one stars Gian Maria Vogliante. And it's just a really, really good paranoia thriller. In my opinion, it's one of the best kind of more Italian crime films that Damiani did, and he did a lot of really, really good ones. I don't think this is quite top tier Damiano Damiani, but it is a very good one, and I think most people would enjoy this. So going to give this a 7.5 rating. Let me know how you like this review. Shout outs to Radiance too for releasing them. I appreciate all of that. Those were not on my bingo cards for the last few years to see Damiani films released. I hope that Confessions of a Police Captain could get restored at some point, because I think that's a really pivotal film in the Poliziotteschi genre, and I think one of the best ones too. Okay, so thank you everyone for tuning in. Hit that subscribe button if you'd like. If you'd like to see more of these, and hit the thumbs up too if you enjoyed the video. Thank you all for tuning in. I'll see y'all next time. Cheers.